My chart could be better. This is the 40th day first video. I'm going to continue today to try to show you about how we got English. As I say, the chart could be better, but I'm going to pick up where I left behind. The Germanic branch, the Germanic family produced a northern branch. There it is, northern branch, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Icelandic, and a southern branch, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. The Celtic family, it's kind of at a dead end. It did not have much of an influence on English, which is odd because it is spoken in the British Isles, but English comes from there. Greek, that did not have a dead end. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. The Italic, these are families really. The Italic family generated the Romance languages. Latin, Portuguese, Spanish, Romanish in Switzerland, Romanian, and French. That I talked about before. Well, I want to pick up the story. When we get to the collapse of the Roman Empire, there was something else I was going to tell you that sort of no, this is it. The collapse of the Roman Empire. That was, I used the year 450 AD. And more or less, it wasn't a clean situation, but anyway, with the collapse of the Roman Empire, Latin ended up gradually, I don't like to say dying, because people misunderstand that. It morphed into other languages, but French is the real principal player for us who speak English. So by the year, after about 500 or 600 years of isolation, these languages had separated out, and so there we've got French. Well, with the collapse of the Roman Empire, there were three tribes of Germans, maybe more, but Anglo Saxons and Jutes. I say Germans, they were Germanic. That now England was prime for picking, because the Roman Empire had collapsed. The Roman army had guarded England. This is where probably King Arthur, the legends of King Arthur come into play. Very possibly a Roman general. But anyway, it collapsed. And so now the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, and maybe others, invaded England successfully. And they took the primary land. They drove the native occupants to the west, the British. And they ended up going up into Scotland and often there's a joke, and into Wales, and there's a joke about the ones who could swim made it to Ireland, but anyway, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, those are areas where the Celtic languages were spoken, but then later on they were sort of overwhelmed by English, so that if somebody has an appealing to an American ear, an appealing Irish accent, well, they're speaking English. They're not speaking Irish. They're speaking English with an Irish accent. So that's kind of like a dead end. So the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes invaded, took the best land, and England was the land of the Angles. It was Angleland, England. Now I'm making this, I make this story a little more simple than maybe I should, because the Danes invaded as well, and there is the Danelaw, and northern England, to this day, 1,000 years later, more than 1,000 years later, you can hear the different accent in northern England, because that was the Danelaw. You know, so I grant that. Remember, this is for 8th graders. This is linguistics for teenagers, but it's exciting. The language for England was Anglo-Saxon, and at the point which becomes so critical to the history of the English language, a king by the name of Harold the Saxon ruled England. But there was a guy over in France, a Norman by the name of Duke William of Normandy. Now the Normans, they had been Norsemen. And they had settled in that part of France, and accepted French as their language, so the Normans spoke French. And Duke William of Normandy felt that he had a claim to the English throne. And anyway, there was a battle which is unbelievably significant in the history of the English language, the Battle of Hastings. There was a point where Duke William of Normandy, history knows him as William the Conqueror, gathered an army, basically told his guys, as I understand it, that if they won, they would be rewarded by being given England. They would be parceled out. They would get properties if they would join him. And he had a claim to the throne. It was a little questionable. Well, anyway, it was in October of 1066. They know exactly the date. And that day changed the English language forever. He took an army across the English Channel, landed, and near there, at a place called Hastings, fought a battle. And this is also known as the Norman Invasion, and it happened in the year 1066. Well, here was a collision of languages, because Harold the Saxon, he hurriedly had to come down from the north where he had fought another battle, was probably not ready, and he took on the Normans and lost. The tradition has it that he was killed by an arrow in the eye, looking up on the top of a hill, and the Normans couldn't charge up the hill and get him, so they lofted their arrows into the air, so they came raining down, and sadly, or whatever, historically, he looked up and got an arrow in the eye and died. And once Harold the Saxon had died, well, it was kind of over. The result, in any case, was that a French-speaking king, William, conquered England, and it wasn't as neat and clean as what I'm talking about, but he pretty much then moved on to the north, mopped it up, and then divvied out the land to his French-speaking followers. And England became occupied by a French-speaking nobility. So for about 200 years, England had two languages spoken. The occupiers, those in control, the king, the courts, the education, to the extent that there was education, even the church was French, or maybe Latin to some extent. Whereas the commoners, the ordinary people working out in the fields, the laborers, they weren't just killed off, they kept working. Well, they spoke Anglo-Saxon, which was very closely related to Germanic. So you had basically two languages, the language of the elite and the language of the peasants in England for about 200 years. But after about 200 years, the two gradually blended together, and the result was something called Middle English. I'll pick this story up again in the next video of today. I'm going fast. But if you would like to hear the story better explained and in more detail, Robert McNeill, The Story of English, The Mother Tongue, he does a very good job of this. So I'm not done. I hope you come back for a second video today.